All right. Welcome to the Monster in My Head show, a podcast where we talk to real people about the real insecurities and issues a lot of us face, as well as discuss unique ways to overcome them. I am your host, Bree, and today we are talking to one of my wonderful friends, Lauren, who is a lawyer from Los Angeles and who is just an overall amazing person. So, hi, Lauren. Welcome.
Hi, Bree. Thanks for having me.
Of course. I'm really excited to talk to you about this. So, today we're going to be talking about overcoming people pleasing and social anxiety. So, this is something that in our conversations, I know we've talked about quite a lot. Both of us have struggled with this. So I kind of wanted to get us started and ask for you, as you've been kind of working through your kind of people pleasing tendencies, first of all, where did that start? And then also tell us a little bit about like how that shows up in your life, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sounds good. And ever since our conversation in Lake Tahoe, I've been looking forward to this because we just
Yeah.
really deep into all of our trauma talks, and I feel like it was meant to be in a podcast ever since that moment.
Totally. Totally.
But I always think of people pleasing as like the absence of self visibility and like the
Mm,
absence of self advocacy because you're
mm,
making your needs and your feelings and your boundaries invisible and prioritizing other people. So I think for me, it kind of shows up as that overarching theme where like I have a feeling or I'm aware that I need something in a relationship or I want to set a boundary, but then I make that invisible for the sake of the other person or maybe
mm,
out of fear of conflict or creating distance and maybe even punishment if it doesn't get received well. And that's kind of like the overarching way that I see all the different kind of people pleasing tendencies that are stereotypically known, like not saying no or over apologizing or over explaining and over justifying your
mm,
decisions, or if you can't go to something or if you can't do something for someone, all of that kind of falls under that same umbrella of like my needs and feelings and experiences don't matter as much as other people's. And
mhm.
if I make them visible, I'll be a bother or a burden or an inconvenience. So that's
Yeah.
kind of like the umbrella of how I think about it.
Mm,
And where that came from, I think same place everyone's kind of tendencies come from, childhood, our
yeah.
formative years when
Mhm.
you're just a sponge taking in the world and forming your beliefs about relationships and safety and connection. And I had a dad who was very volatile. He would have emotional outbursts.
Mhm.
And I would sometimes express my needs and my feelings around it or call him out for his behavior or let him know how he was impacting me. And I don't think he ever responded in any way besides either like dismissing my
Mm.
experience, making a joke out of it,
Mm.
like laughing at it or mocking it, giving the silent treatment,
Oof.
or intentionally doing the thing I asked him not to do that makes me uncomfortable. And then kind of like
Mm.
snickering and like getting joy out of my distress. And so
Mm.
his actions showed me that my needs and feelings don't matter and that I should be walking on eggshells and tending to his
Mhm.
because I get punished when I make mine visible. And I don't think it was his intent to make me feel that way. I think it's just his own unhealed wounds and
Mhm.
things that he hasn't gained self awareness around, but it had that
Mhm.
impact on me. And from my mom's side, and I got permission from her to share everything about this. She's my best friend, my soulmate.
Yay,
So
mom.
I was like, "Mom, I'm going to be like telling everything," and she was like, "Oh my god, please
Oh.
do.
Mm.
Gotta gotta get gotta give you permission to like feel comfortable talking about these sort of things." And
Yeah.
she would sort of be in survival mode growing up, so she would see
Mm.
the way that my dad was acting
Mm.
and come up to me if I set him off and be like, "Why'd you do that?" And that made me feel like I was responsible for not setting him off and that my needs and feelings that I was making visible weren't actually as important as managing his feelings were by not
100%.
setting him
It's
off that way.
interesting that you say that because I mean, you and I have very, in some ways, similar experiences. My parents didn't react in the same way that your dad did, but I also grew up in a very volatile household with a very angry dad who has thankfully very much changed and become an amazing person, but he was very broken, just like you were saying about your dad. And so there was a lot of anger in the house, and so there was definitely this. I know that tendency well of being like, okay, whatever I do, I just have to make sure that everyone else is okay. Because if I make sure that they're okay, then they create a safe environment for me. And then
Yeah,
I am able to then function. And also having the whole parent who's in survival mode. It's like a parent who's not able to really protect you in the way that you need to because they're just trying to survive their relationship that they're in. So it's interesting taking all that into consideration and realizing like how else could we have been like growing like there wasn't another way for us to turn out and be like, oh, we're perfectly relationally healthy. Like obviously that's going to have a major impact. So
absolutely.
for you, like when was, or I guess like what was the turning point for you when you kind of realized that this was the way that you were relationally, and then what did you decide to kind of do about it?
So, in terms of people pleasing, I think I just had an awareness that it's still something I'm working on at my
Mm-hmm.
30th birthday in August. And you were there, and we all went around or you guys asked me at the birthday dinner what was kind of a goal for this year. And I was like, I want to
Mm,
stop people pleasing and really make
mm,
myself visible in this way. Because
yeah.
I've been doing therapy for since January 2021, and I love my therapist. She's the best. And I've learned so much like throughout our work, but I think a lot of it was like building a secure attachment style and
Oof,
moving in that
huge.
direction and like letting go of codependent tendencies which relate to kind of what you and me both talked about, the role we learned to play in our families,
Yeah.
feeling responsible for others' feelings and protecting their feelings and kind of managing their feelings for them by not triggering them and creating conflict just by being visible as a human. And
Mm,
I really made so much progress on those 2 points and just kind of like building that baseline of self love in the first 2.5 years. But then it was like last summer when I turned 30, 2.5 years into therapy, and I was like, I don't feel like I've progressed on people pleasing at all. I feel like I still am kind of, it's just comfortable to keep holding on to those habits. Like if everyone's
mm,
like, what do you want to do? But everyone else wants to do something else. I'll just be like, yeah, that's fine. Cause it's just
mm-hmm,
comfortable. It's easier. And I like to
mm-hmm,
do, I really am agreeable, but it's like, I'm not making my voice and my opinions and my preferences as visible. And I have an older sister. And I think when you're the youngest born, you kind of come into this world and everyone else has to adjust to you now existing, but you've never known a world without them. So you can
mm,
kind of end up in that role where you're the follower because it's like my sister's a very dominant alpha personality, so she was always calling the shots, and then I just kind of like
mm,
assumed the role of follower and went along with everything, and that made our family run smoothly. And if there was times when I would say, oh, I want to do something else, I think it just didn't go as smoothly. So then my parents kind of encouraged me to stay in that same role,
yeah. Kind of
and
like put you
that
down a
just
little
kind of like
bit.
ended up being the family dynamic. There was all these different ways where I just sort of needed to hear that like my voice and feelings and opinions and preferences and needs all mattered. And
Mm,
all of these ways I was kind of being told they didn't, but that wasn't what
mm-hmm,
people were intending to tell me. That's just how your little self, when you're a little sponge and the whole world is like telling you information about yourself, that's just how you interpret it as a kid. So
mm-hmm.
kind of have still been holding on to this people pleasing tendency of like putting other people first and struggling to say no and being agreeable and avoiding conflict and all that kind of stuff as of like last summer. So I really just started making progress for like 6 months now.
But you know
But
what's so interesting is that you probably have so much more awareness of it, of that side of you than other people who also deal with that who are not on the therapy journey, or people who maybe don't struggle with it like a lot, but it is still a part of their lives and but they don't even know it. So the fact that
yeah,
you even know that this is a struggle, that is like the biggest first step, so that's super exciting that you're on this journey. And I know that you're already making progress. And I know for myself as well, like once I kind of had an awareness of it, I was like, okay, what are the tangible steps that I can take to start like overcoming this? And one of the things that you mentioned, I want to bring up a quote from, there's an article in Psych Central that said, our need to please is actually more of a need to belong,
mm,
by a psychotherapist named Sharon Martin, which I really related to because I know for myself, my people pleasing came from not only growing up in kind of a volatile household but also entering the industry so young. I wanted to belong in this industry. I wanted to, we moved to California when I was 13. I wanted to belong in the friend group, and so it was like whatever I could do to just fit in, to not be left alone, and to not, then I think that kind of resulted for me into a fear of abandonment that I definitely found coming into like relationships and like romantic relationships especially, um was a real issue for me. And so you had mentioned attachment styles. So obviously our goal is secure attachment. If you wouldn't mind, I'd love to hear like what attachment style for you developed out of the childhood that you have, because I know that there's secure, there's avoidant, anxious, and then disorganized. So which one did you like relate to most, and do you still struggle with that attachment style?
Yeah, I honestly relate to pieces of all of them. I
Mm-hmm.
think in many ways I've seen myself have like a pure anxious attachment style in the past, and people pleasing is often correlated with that. And then sometimes
Mm-hmm.
more of like the fearful avoidant where you want closeness and intimacy with people, but at the same time you don't trust it and you push it away and you fear it. So I've never really seen classical avoidance where I'm just like totally independent and not aware of my interest in being close to people, even though
Mm-hmm.
everyone's interested in being close to people, no matter where you
Mm-hmm.
fall on that spectrum. But
Mm-hmm.
I think more so the other end of things is where I fell. And I've made so much progress just from like doing the therapy work. I think a lot of it, you just need to have a safe experience enough times in a row to show your
Totally.
body through repetition that a new belief could be true. Like rewiring those neural pathways, that's literally all it
Mm.
comes down to. And
Yep.
that requires you to show up for yourself by saying what you need, even when it's scary and uncomfortable and you don't know how it's going to be received, and then giving the other person a chance to be responsive and be like, oh my God, thank you for telling me. Like, I've wanted to meet your needs this whole time. I just didn't know what they were. So, like, I really appreciate that. I'm going
Mm.
to be mindful of that. Like, if you don't give anyone a chance to show that to you, then you don't give yourself a chance to form a new belief that it can be safe to be visible in relationships.
100%. I understand that fear so well. I think for me, I literally didn't date for a long time. Or when I would date, it would be from a very like walled off perspective of like, I'm fine if you like me or not. And I don't really care, but please like me, you know? But like, I, I definitely get that feeling of where your body like reacts to that. And that is a really scary thing when you're trying to be present with someone and your body is like telling you don't trust this person, even if they've proven themselves to be trustworthy in the past. What have been some tactics that you've used as you've been going through this process to like calm your body down in that neural pathway, like rewiring?
Yeah, lots of different tactics. Honestly, sometimes this is what I'll say first. I wrote some of them down, so I'm scrolling down on my document. But
Yeah.
some of the times I had to sort of do the opposite. Like I in my therapy work, I practiced a lot of these skills, like the
Mm,
relationship skills through our relationship and work together. And sometimes when I would practice something for the first time, it would like activate my nervous system, and then I would name that I felt that way, thinking that that's also making my inner experience visible. And like that's just
mm,
doubling down on the work. But then that would like activate me even more. And I kind of had to just keep doing that to myself, like bringing up all the fear and the terror of like
yes.
doing the
Yep.
things that my body codes as unsafe, and then
Mm-hmm.
see, oh, wait, this person's still there. They're not going
Mm-hmm.
anywhere, like enough times in a row, and keep practicing with other humans. Because I think like
Mm,
our beliefs formed because of our relationships with other humans. So, like, the only way
mm-hmm.
to form a different belief is through relational healing, too. But I think some of the things that make it easier when you're like maybe dating someone new, or like you want to tell a friend how they've impacted you and you just want to like get your nervous system like regulated and in a good space, is cold exposure is really good. Like cold
Mm-hmm.
showers, I just find it so regulating, and there's so much science to back up like hot and cold
Mm,
exposure, cycling between the two. Mindful meditation, breath work.
mm-hmm.
I do emotional freedom technique, which is tapping. We could do a whole
Mm.
podcast on that. It's really cool.
Yeah.
And then things like sighing and singing, like making sounds and movement, like shaking and yoga, and just kind of like releasing energy from your body has been really
Mm.
helpful. So, like, a lot of different things. Just kind of got to try it all and then figure out what works in what situation, and keep a list of that to reference and pull from. That's been a helpful thing to do, kind of just keeping track of what does and doesn't work. Because
Yeah,
sometimes
that's
I'm just not good
huge.
at lists. And when I actually make them, I really appreciate it.
No, 100%. I love writing things down. It helps me keep track of things and keep things in order. And I love that you said that it's desensitizing yourself. That's something that and I have a podcast at when we're filming this is going to be like released before this one, but it's all about overcoming dating anxiety. And for me, that was such a that was such a big thing in my life for so long, of being so afraid of being vulnerable. And then when I was vulnerable, doing the people pleasing thing. Um, but I do truly think the only way to overcome anxiety is to put yourself in situations where you're, like you said, experiencing the thing that you're afraid of. But then in some ways, like just making sure it's like a safe environment to do so. Like, so for me, for example, I was afraid of getting to know men. And so I would like go out on a date and be in like a public place and be like, okay, I'm just gonna like, I'm not expecting anything from this, but the fact that I'm here and the fact that I'm engaging in this way is success for me. And so, like, I, instead of maybe being as, like humor forward, cold, I'm going to try to be a little bit vulnerable. And then if they don't text me right away, I'm not going to freak out. I'm going to recognize that I'm being scared and then kind of like you said, breathe through it, try these different tactics. So I think this whole idea of going into social experiences without having it needing to turn out a certain way just for the experience itself, knowing that that's healing, I think
Yeah.
that's really, that at least was really helpful for me.
Absolutely, because focusing on the outcome is kind of not the point. It's the fact that
Mm-hmm.
you're showing up for yourself and being willing to grow and learn and put yourself in uncomfortable positions, because the only way to expand your comfort zone is to step outside of it.
Mm-hmm.
And when you were saying the thing about belonging, what was it exactly that you said again?
Yeah, no worries. It's our need to please is actually more of a need to belong.
I was thinking, I was like, people pleasing is seeking to belong, but it's literally the loneliest way you could ever belong somewhere because you're not
Mm,
even seen. And that
so
just kind of
good.
clicked in my head as you were saying that. And I was like,
That's so good.
it kind of is attempting to maintain connection, but it's walling you off from that very connection that you're attempting to maintain. And so
For
it's like a
sure.
misguided way to stay in connection with people because you really are pulling yourself out of it.
That's something that I definitely realized probably within the last year is, hey, if I pretend to be someone that I'm not, even if people like me, they don't actually like me because I'm not being myself. So, like you said, that is a very lonely experience to be like, I'm not actually known. No one actually knows
Yeah.
me enough to like want me or want to be with me. And I'm me constantly being a chameleon. I know I kind of described myself that way for a long time of I was a chameleon, especially in my teenage years, to like try to make the industry want me, try to make my friends want me. And then, like you said, it just resulted in me being isolated. And I was like, wow, so no one knows that I exist, no one cares. And that was kind of the trigger to be like, okay, I probably need to figure out how not to do this anymore because this is horrible.
Yeah, because it's like you're fitting in, but it's not even you who's fitting in.
Yeah.
So you're really not getting what you even wanted. Like, how good does it feel to find people that actually choose you for you?
Mm-hmm. And
Which
that's
is
really
really
scary,
scary.
though, to put yourself out there. It's really scary to, and I think I was talking about this in a different episode, maybe the dating one, of being like, I'm going to allow my quirks to come out. I'm going to just like let myself be myself. And then if someone doesn't like me, like that's okay. I think the way that I framed it in my mind at this point is if someone doesn't like me, it's a compatibility issue. It's not, I'm not a problem. If, I'm
Yeah.
not like, as long as I'm not being mean to someone, obviously, but like, if we don't jive, that is not my fault that we're not jiving. I'm not
Hmm.
causing the issue. It's just that we just don't work together. And that's okay. That's no one's fault, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been seeing that with unlearning people pleasing too. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, when someone maybe reacts like I named a need or a feeling and they react like that's too much or a burden or whatever their reaction might be that doesn't feel safe and supportive and
Mm-hmm.
responsive to me, I'm like, oh, that's kind of a reflection of them and where they're at and their capacity to be emotionally available and supportive. It doesn't say
Mm-hmm.
anything about me. It's not a reflection of how lovable I am or how deserving I am of being treated like my needs matter. It's not reflecting that my needs don't matter. It just literally has
Mm-hmm.
everything to do with them and nothing to do with me. And kind of creating that separation and not
Mm-hmm.
seeing everyone's behavior through that lens of your wound and then taking it personal.
Mm.
That's kind of been a big part. And I did a lot of EMDR therapy, which
Girl, me too.
helps. Let's go. But it kind of helps you like not be as attached to these situations and seeing them
Mm,
from the perspective of your beliefs, but kind of being the one observing your belief and being like, oh, well, that's just the belief. I'm the one over here seeing clearly that that's this person's thing, and then this is me, and I'm their behavior says nothing about me. And it really
mm,
did help me create separation to kind of work on those beliefs and reprogram them. Did you find EMDR to be helpful with this
Oh my
aspect
God.
too?
Yes, absolutely. And I love that you're talking about sitting in the seat of awareness, which is something that that is a huge part of my spiritual practice is, understanding that you as the awareness are different, are you separate from your emotions. You're the one
Yeah,
experiencing your emotions. I
powerful.
recently have written a story that kind of like, it's a not really fictionalized, but sort of fictionalized account of like going through a mind castle and finding the things that are in that, like the different traumas, the different pain, and all that stuff. And it's almost like your brain is where you live, and the things in it are just the things you experience. But like you said, those emotions don't define you. Um, and that's a very hard concept to fully get. So like the fact that you're at that place, that I'm at that place, I feel like that means we made a lot of progress.
Absolutely. Awareness is like the first step, but the most important one. Because without
Yes.
awareness, you can't do anything else. It's like the foundation of all the rest of your work.
Yeah.
So go
It's
us.
I heard this analogy of from a teacher named Michael Singer who I listened to a lot, and he was saying about how like imagine that there is an ocean, there's these waves, and you are just this like bird sitting on the waves, and when the waves get really choppy, you're just like trying to like stay afloat, when in reality, if you were just seeing your sense of awareness, you could literally just fly over those waves and observe them, be like, oh, my mind is being really shitty right now, like I'm feeling really anxious, I'm feeling really sad, but like
I
I'm
love
looking
that.
at them from an aware perspective and not just getting caught up and drowning in them.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when we over identify with our feelings, they feel so real, but it's just a
Mm-hmm.
temporary experience. It's just information passing through us like weather, and
Mm.
it'll be gone. And we're the sky, weky not the weather. I love that analogy too.
Yeah.
Most
We're the
classic
sky.
meditation analogy, but like
I know,
I'm always
seriously. I'm
like,
like,
bro, you're the
oh,
sky. Remember it.
you're the sky.
You're not the
I love
weather.
that.
Stop.
I love that. So, when it comes to how you've started kind of recognizing when these people pleasing tendencies are happening, like, what is the trigger for you? Because I know for me, like, I think you were saying before, like, wanting to say no, but then not saying no. Like, what are the triggers for you to recognize, hey, I'm falling into these patterns again? And then how do you communicate that with the person you're with yourself? And like, what do you do to kind of stop yourself from doing that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think for me, it always comes down to not wanting to lose connection, like in the most
Mm,
simplest of ways, whether conflict creates distance or
mm,
you think, oh, well, if I have all these things that I need to say, I'm going to be too difficult and who's going to want to choose that? Like all those sort of
mm,
stories that come up, and I've worked on a lot of those stories, but sometimes the behavior that you default to kind of just goes on as a habit after you've already healed some of your beliefs and triggers and feelings. And then you just
mm,
have to like identify what all these habits are and notice when they're coming up and then get intentional to choose a new habit and form that.
mm.
Because you're like, wait, I don't even have the fear behind why I created this habit in the first place. Why am I still doing that? And so a
Oh,
lot of
yeah.
like my people pleasing tendencies have just kind of persisted out of comfort, even though I've healed
Mm,
the fear of abandonment relationally. I did a lot
mm,
of work on that in therapy, and I still feel I fear emotional abandonment. Like I fear if I'm too much in a moment, someone will just be like, I can't deal with you and like storm out. Cause I had a lot of that
mhm.
when I was a kid growing up
Yeah.
emotionally. And instead of sit with me through my emotions and hold space and stuff like that. So there's still a different kind of abandonment that I fear. But I think I notice in relationships, it happens more when there's kind like sometimes you can just feel someone's energy and you're like, okay, we're kind of clashing right now. There's all this
Mhm.
unspoken stuff. Are they going to say it first? And I've had a lot of close friendships and relationships with men where no one really takes the lead on being the direct person. And
Mm,
I did enter a relationship in September that I'm no longer in. And when I started that relationship, it was someone that I'd been in, and of course, you know who this person is, but I had been in a situationship with them on and off for almost a 2 year period at that time. And after a 4 month gap of that situationship ending, they came back and were like, hey, I miss you. And I was like, okay, I made my promise a month earlier that like people pleasing, I'm going to just form new habits now. And
mhm.
I had kind of gotten clear on when I see myself people please, and it's really a lot of the times just to like keep things comfortable and more habitual rather than like specific fear driving it anymore.
Mm,
And so I was like, this is a perfect opportunity for me to see what happens when I say what I need and how I feel. So I just got really
Mm.
direct and I was like, hey, I'm only looking to exclusively date someone right now. What are you looking for? Let's make sure we don't waste each other's time. Just
Mm.
really direct and to the
Huge.
point, said what I need, said how I felt.
Yeah.
And to my surprise, he was responsive. So then we tried a relationship for 5 months, but ultimately a difference in needs, I would say, is what it came down to. But I was
I think
proud.
also a difference in integrity and being a good person, but we'll talk about that later.
Thank
Uh,
you.
so I'm interested to know though. So yeah, so you started off that relationship stating your needs, which first of all is such a huge win. That is super scary to do, especially when you're very used to not doing that. So good on you. Even if it
Thanks,
didn't work out
friend.
in the end, like that is a huge triumph. Um, and then when things started kind of going south, when you realized that you were with someone who it sounds like did not take your needs into consideration, which is very interesting because the way that we've grown up is kind of like, oh, well, that's exactly what it's supposed to be, right? Like they're not supposed to care about, and I'm supposed to be okay that they don't care about my needs. But you decided to leave. So I'd love to hear about like what it was your thought process of first of all recognizing this person did not care about your needs and fulfilling them. He only cared about his own. And then how did you make that decision to instead of continue in a relationship that affirmed that fear to actually instead leave and break that cycle?
Yeah, so the reason I gave it the chance, and thank you for saying all that, but the reason I gave it the chance was it seemed like he was so responsive to
Mm-hmm.
me stepping forward and initiating direct communication and opening up that way that neither of us had before in our previous times together. And so I had high hopes that maybe I just needed to be the one to bring that forward first, and then he would join me in it. And for a while he
Mm.
did, but when we got further into the relationship, there was a lot of times when I felt like if our needs clashed, I would try to find a way to get creative and meet both of ours, and he would instead try to invalidate mine. And there was a lot of
Mm. Oof.
situations
Yeah.
where that was kind of the energy of it. And I went through periods in therapy where I was like, I feel so angry and I don't know why. And I was figuring it out. I'm like, am I perceiving this correctly or am I kind of projecting my own wounds onto it? And it took me a little while to
Mm.
really get rooted in my self trust and my perspective of reality. And honestly, it didn't take that long. After a certain point, I was kind of like, you know what? This doesn't feel safe. I don't
Mm.
feel like I'm equally visible. And then I feel like when I do make myself equally visible, I am met with this like responsiveness in a way where it's like, I'm sorry I made you feel that way. And like, honestly, a genuine apology, but just not a capacity to really understand what my needs are. So I felt like I wasn't really known and seen. But the thing that was different this time is I didn't feel like this is evidence that I don't deserve to be seen in a
Mm.
relationship. This isn't
Come on.
evidence that I should make myself invisible again. I felt angry. And so for the first time ever, I was like, that means I'm actually like, really making progress in healing myself because I'm seeing that this is a person who's not making me feel safe and I don't deserve that. I'm not thinking this is what I deserve and they're evidence of the truth of that. So that
Oof.
was really cool. That was a
That's huge.
big moment. And I mean, at this point in my work, I was just really glad to see that because people pleasing is something I really had resistance around because it is so comfortable. I think like
Yeah.
a big reason why it's so hard to unlearn is it's just very comfortable to stay in
And
those
people affirm
habits.
that within you there because it makes them, it gives them something, so they're like, no, no, keep people pleasing because that means
Yeah.
you'll do whatever I want, and then you won't put up a fight or won't say your needs, so it's easier for me. So yeah, it's very difficult to break out of that. And I think the fact that like you ended that relationship because you weren't feeling seen, you were angry, like that is a huge deal. And I think, we were talking before this recording that it's really easy to feel shame around how we allow, in air quotes, people to treat us. But when we're going through healing, it's all a learning process.
Yeah.
You have to like be in a situation to then recognize, oh, I don't deserve to be treated this way. Oh, wow, I'm recognizing I don't deserve to be treated this way. Okay, what am I going to do about it? And then do something about it. And now you have this information where you're not going to allow that to happen again. If somebody starts
Yeah.
treating you that way, it sounds like you'll be able to recognize that very quickly. and be like, no, fuck
Yeah.
that.
I think it's an empowering experience because the same way we need safe people in our life to
Hmm.
form the new belief and see that that really exists, we also need to show ourselves that if we're with someone unsafe, we can show up for ourselves and see reality clearly and see that it's not a reflection of us, but rather a
Mm.
reflection of their character, or their capacity, or their unhealed stuff, and
Hmm.
nothing to do with us. Like, you have to experience that to really trust yourself to be able to show up in a relationship that way. Because if you've only really experience safe people, then how do you know the second an unsafe person comes along that you'll advocate for yourself? So I like,
Hmm.
my soul needed that experience. Definitely dealt with the shame of, why am I allowing someone to treat me this way? Why am I not
Hmm.
getting out immediately when certain things were said or done? And I
Hmm.
knew that that was not acceptable, and I was embarrassed to tell my friends. But at a certain point, it really did provide a great learning experience, and I was able to end it saying, these are my needs, and I know these are your needs, and I can't meet your needs, and
Hmm.
it is what it is. I made it. I didn't
Hmm.
try to be what he wanted, and I think me 5 years ago, if I really like someone, I'm gonna see their needs, recognize that's not me, that's not my true self, I can't meet it, but try to become that person for them. Like,
Hmm.
try
Hmm.
to put their needs above my own, but just being in a place of being like, I can't do that. I don't have the energy for that. I don't want to. I
Hmm.
want to be my true self, and I want to find who wants to be with me, whether it's a romantic partner or friends or
Hmm.
anyone. I'm like, I just want to surround myself with people that are actually choosing me and seeing me, and not
Yeah.
feeling seen doesn't feel great. So
No, it doesn't. That's beautiful though. That's such a I think as much as you can feel empowered in that, as you say that, you're feeling that is awesome because it is so true. Like our lives are just lessons. We just experience different things. We learn, we grow, we become better. And then better things can come into our lives because of that. I know for myself, the person that I was when I was really experiencing a lot of people pleasing, when I was in my last relationship, where it was a very verbally abusive relationship, I felt the same thing of feeling a lot of shame around how he was talking to me. So I wouldn't tell my friends about it because I was like, well, maybe if I just try to like mold myself enough, I can maybe make him feel okay enough to treat me well.
yeah,
And so I didn't say anything either. And then eventually I did, end that. But if I hadn't experienced that and learned from that, I wouldn't have been able to become relationally healthy enough to enter into a healthy relationship. I had to
yeah,
like learn communication skills from being with someone who was horrible, but thankfully neither you and I made the decision to marry those people, so it was a lot easier to end that and walk away. I can imagine
absolutely,
that's very difficult if you decide to marry someone and then have to go through that whole process, but again, all
yeah.
just lessons.
Yeah, because I mean, it's an honest thing to be like, well, maybe if I put my best foot forward and show up for myself and speak directly and
Hmm.
initiate all of the healthy, emotionally mature communication, maybe they'll be able to join me in that and meet me in that. But you can only give someone so many chances to step up to the plate. And some people just can't see beyond themselves, and they can't meet anyone else any deeper than they met themselves. I like that quote
Mm,
because I'm like, that makes a lot
that's
of
good.
sense. And I'm like, if they just don't have the capacity to treat someone else well, there's nothing that we can do that's going to change that. And just kind of like
Huge.
having to learn that through experience, I think, is the way a lot of people have to come to that realization. So
Yeah, you
you and me
can't
both.
change people. You just like I definitely realized that in my last relationship of like I can't change this person. He's an angry person. He's a very has some, stuff from his childhood going on, but that is not my job to change him to make him treat me better. And he said he loved me. He said all these different things, but like you can love someone, but if you don't treat them well, like we deserve to walk away from that and be like and trust ourselves. And that's actually a point I wanted to go back to. You had talked about self-trust. So how did you start developing self trust to believe in yourself when you're like thinking, hey, this is feeling bad. Why is this feeling bad? I'm going to investigate that further. Like, what was that process of developing that for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I saw a quote on Instagram the other day, and it was like, confidence isn't thinking you're the greatest person ever, it's self trust. And I was like,
Mm,
that's so true, because I think a lot of people who grow up to be a people pleaser have this like absence of self trust because a lot of the things that we went through didn't teach us how to be in tune with our own experience and trust it. We were so focused on tending to everyone else's experiences and being attuned to them. So then it's like, well,
mm,
what is going on in here? What do I need? What do I feel? I don't even know myself. Like, and on that level. And
Mm.
I think it was kind of a process of like getting to know myself and getting to know all those different things that I need in relationships and feel. And then adding on to that, starting to notice like what triggers me in relationships and auditing in myself. Is this triggering me because of a wound or like a negative core belief that I have? And it's bringing that up in me and it's my own stuff that I have to heal? Or is their behavior genuinely unsafe and my body is recognizing that? And I think the
It's a big
more
deal.
you ask yourself that same question in a row
Yeah.
and just keep track of it, you're like, wait a minute, this is a pattern in their
Mm.
behavior. This is like objectively something. This is a big one that I like to do. It's where you reverse it, where you're like, if my friend's boyfriend treated them that way, would I feel the same way? And I feel
Totally.
even more angry because I get so protective and angry for like the women in my life. And I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, so that's objectively bad behavior. Or if I reversed it and I was like, if I treated someone else that way, how would I feel about myself? And then I'm like,
Mm.
well, I'd feel horrible if I treated someone that way because that's a bad way to treat someone.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of just reversing it and swapping out people you care about for yourself as you learn to build self-love, and then that kind of gives you more perspective to audit like
Mm.
where this reaction in your body's coming from. And over time doing that enough in a row and kind of like talking it out in therapy and having like someone to work through it with and help validate like, no, that's genuinely like unsafe behavior. Because I mean, you and me, we didn't have a frame of reference growing up for what some safe behavior looks like. So
Mm-mm.
we're out in the world with a blindfold and we can feel like intuitively, oh, this doesn't feel safe. But like we're having to build a mental picture for what safe men and safe humans look like for ourselves. And I think
Mm-hmm.
it's just trial and error going through it that way. But that's really helped me to do all those
Yeah.
different little things.
Absolutely. I think the one of the points that you brought up that I like a lot is this whole development of self-love. I know for myself, when I was younger, I really struggled with a lot of self-hatred just because of internalized things that I witnessed growing up, as well as like being in the industry as long as I was when I was young. And it was a lot easier to people please when I didn't like myself very much, because it was like, well, I don't deserve to be treated well. So I'm just going to, of course, I'm going to acquiesce to somebody else's needs, almost like you had mentioned before, like a self punishing kind of thing. But I
Yeah,
think that might even, to me, at least, I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on it, be the foundation for ending people pleasing is loving yourself enough to be like, I don't deserve to be treated this way. And I'm going to advocate for myself because I love myself that I get treated differently. Would you say that that's accurate?
absolutely. That's so the core of I think codependency, people pleasing, even anxious
Mm-hmm.
attachment. There's
Mm-hmm.
that underlying self-love deficit there.
Mm-hmm.
And I notice it's kind of been symbiotic, like creating self-love through intentional practice and
Mm-hmm.
through relational healing and safe situations that I've experienced and put myself in. But then also practicing not people pleasing even before I love myself, like being like, oh, well, I'm
Mm-hmm.
really scared to say, hey, it really helps me when you do this in a relationship. That's
Mm-hmm.
like so scary if you don't have a deep enough sense of self love to feel worthy of being treated well or feel worthy of someone else caring about your needs or your boundaries or whatever. So I
Yeah.
just like sort of as an experiment got myself to start practicing saying little things like that. Even like when we went to Lake Tahoe and Brittany was like, do you want to DJ? And I was like, no. Little
Big
moments like that.
deal. Yeah,
It's a
absolutely.
practice. And then it's like, oh, I just showed myself that I love myself because I actually said what I need. And so
Mm,
you need enough self-love to start doing that, but then when you do it, it builds more. And so it becomes this
totally.
like awesome process of, oh, I'm showing myself love each time I do that, and that feels really good. And then
Yeah.
I feel loved by my friends when they're receptive and like, you guys cheered me on for just that one little thing, and I was like, I feel so supportive, or
Yeah.
I feel so supported, and like that just kind of snowballs into this self advocacy where you're like, oh, it is safe. And I just
Mm,
stayed in my comfort zone for a while. And now I love myself more that I got out of it. And yeah, it's all
yeah.
connected.
I love that whole idea of even when you're starting and still building the whole self love, making it a habit to stand up for yourself. So even if you don't feel intrinsically motivated because of, you know, the love for yourself, you're like, well, I'm just in my brain going to start making new habits because I know eventually I will get there and it will be supported by that internal motivation of taking care of myself because I love myself. But until that happens, I'm going to take the actions to start affirming that, which I absolutely do believe will rewire your neural pathways even as you're starting to develop that actual self love.
Yeah, the habits are making you develop more of the self-love.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a really
Mm-hmm.
cool collaborative process in that way.
Yeah. Dude, yeah, you have so much wisdom in this area, and this has been so awesome talking to you about this. And also, even with how long we've known each other, the amount that you've grown, and also the amount that we've been able to connect.
Yeah.
I think because of our processes of kind of going through this whole thing together has been really cool. So, I want to ask one more question, then we'll end the show tonight. But what would be your advice to someone who was in your position 5 years ago, where you're just starting to realize, hey, I'm a people pleaser, I need to start making some changes? Like, what would you, advice would you give them?
Ironically, 5 years ago, I was in a Meisner acting class and someone told me I was a people pleaser. And I was like, no, I'm not. And
Oh.
I mean, you first like accepting yourself, integrating that part of yourself instead of like de identifying it and feeling shame around it and being like, that's not me. Like, first, you have to accept, yeah, I have people pleasing tendencies. It doesn't mean I'm fake. It just means I put other people above myself sometimes. And a lot of
Mm,
that really is genuine love and care. I just have it a little out of balance and I got to get back. So, like, integrating that part of yourself and
mm-hmm,
internal family systems is a big part of my work in therapy and figuring out all my different parts. And that would be a whole other conversation. But I just wanted to
mm-hmm,
name that in here for anyone that's in therapy, that that could be a really helpful thing to explore with your therapist to work on this. But so after kind of like accepting you're a people pleaser, I think getting to know yourself, getting to know what are my needs. Oh, I'm feeling this way. I guess I needed this from this person. Let me tell them that. But not even work on it yet. Just like get to know yourself and pay attention to what's going on inside and be intentional to like observe your inner experience so that you can get to know the things that you never got to know by focusing on everyone else's experience. And
mm,
once you get to know yourself, show yourself and then start practicing and start really small, like with just the little things like the DJing in the car and just little moments like that that don't feel like make or break of a relationship. Like, and when you just build those little moments of trust, suddenly you're ready to do the hard things and harder conversations. Um, the reason I say get to know yourself first is because you can't show yourself until you know yourself. And so,
totally.
kind of feel like those two steps are just the most important way to get yourself practicing on learning this. And then the only other thing I thought of is being really intentional with your environment, because if you learned all of these people pleasing tendencies and the negative core beliefs connected to them through the people that you were surrounded by, whether or not that was your choice, the best way to unlearn it is to surround yourself with people that celebrate you showing
Mm,
everything that's going on inside. And they're like, thank you for telling me what you need and how you feel. And thank you for making yourself visible. I want to know you. And people that really encourage you and make you feel safe. Because it reminds me of that quote where they're like, if a flower isn't blooming, you don't blame the flower, you blame the environment. So, like, setting yourself
mm,
up for
mm,
success by intentionally picking safe people to surround yourself with. And then if you have people in your life that just don't have the capacity to be emotionally safe in that way, because so many of us, and especially older people that are very much like, oh, you're in therapy, like that's taboo. And we're all millennials like, hell yeah,
we
therapy. Like,
love it.
if you're
Yeah.
not in therapy, it's a red flag.
Yeah,
Um,
100%.
so if you have people in your life like that, that you really do just have to accept and like embrace the relationship for what it is, just remind yourself that their behavior is not a reflection of you. Like, creating that
Mm-hmm.
distance and recognizing like it's not personal, it's a reflection of their capacity. And that way you protect yourself even when you are around people like that and you're not reinforcing the belief again. So those are kind of
Mm.
like the main things that come to mind.
What great tips. Those are all very tangible. Those are all tips that I'm going to keep for myself as well as I continue learning this. So Lauren,
Nice.
thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. This has been really informative, and again, I'm just so continually impressed by your depth of knowledge about this, and I've like learned a lot from talking with you about this. So thank you for sharing and being part of it. It's been awesome. And anybody who's listening, please continue to listen to the show. If you like it, please subscribe, please like, share it. And we'll be back for another episode. So Lauren, thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon.